Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks with ADSR, and in this video, I'm going to show you the anatomy or the makeup of an 808 sample or sound. I'm not referring to a Roland TR-808, I'm referring to the ubiquitous term that to pretty much every producer sounds like this. Or this. All right, so those are two examples, two different types of 808s, but you guys get the idea. Some type of sub-sine sound with a kick or some type of transient, right? That's what we know as 808s nowadays. So why am I doing this video? Well, it's going to help out any beginner or intermediate producer who's struggling to get a solid low end, especially when they're working obviously with 808s. Just understanding the different components of that sound makes your mix decisions a lot clearer and a lot more objective. All right, so what makes up an 808? Well, it's quite simple. An 808 can be broken up into three distinct sections. The first section is going to be the attack, which is usually going to include some type of pretty heavy transient sound, and a lot of times actually an entire kick sound, or not maybe an entire kick sound, but a short kick sound nonetheless. So here's an example of a very popular 808 sample. It's the Zay Spins 808. You can hear it in pretty much every trap song right now. I mean, it's everywhere. And I've broken it up into its distinct sections. And we can see here this first section is in fact a attack. Our attack is a kick or a transient. It sounds like this. Right? It literally sounds like a baby kick. Now, it may not have as much sustain or as pitch, as an actual kick, but it's a kick nonetheless. Now, the next section of an 808 is going to be the body. Now, the body of an 808 is going to be where you start to hear that subtone, typically a sine wave, sometimes a triangle, sometimes a square. And you can see that right here. If I loop that, right, that's where we actually hear that sub 808 sound. And the third part's going to be the tail. Now, the tail can kind of have a short release, a long release. It could sustain out. It really depends on the type of sample or sound you're going for. All right, so how do we put this information to use? How do we make our mixing skills better, knowing that every 808 is pretty much made up of an attack / kick, the body, and the tail? Well, it's quite simple. You just need to take stock and take a look at what's going on in your mix and determine what's most important to the sound you're after. So let's listen to this track that I put together for this video. And this red track here is an 808 I made in Anna 2. And let's take a quick listen to this. All right, so that 808's a little bit out in front of the mix, but that's okay because we're going to use the information we just learned, the anatomy of the 808, to mix this. So this patch is quite simple. It's two oscillators. We have our kick in our sample oscillator. It sounds like this if I solo it. It's literally our kick sample. And then our body is coming from oscillator 1. It's with this sub-sine wave. And obviously there's a little bit of compression and some saturation giving it that warmth, right? So, but that's really it. It's two oscillators. Now, how does the anatomy of the 808 play in this? Well, first things first, let's address the kick or the attack or the transient. If you're working on a track or your beat has a kick that you like or a really nice punchy kick, like for instance, this beat, I bounced out my drums to this loop, there's a kick. So right away, that kick's going to clash with obviously the kick in the 808. So instead of having to decide later if you want to use multi-band compression, sidechain compression, right, creative EQ techniques, if you can, just remove the kick or turn it down at the very least. So because I made this patch and I set it up separately, I can just turn this macro to turn off my kick, or I could even just go to the mixer and turn it off. So if I don't want to kick at all, right, it just sounds like that. If I want a little bit of a kick, I can just, turn it down. Now, if you're working with a sample, like say that Zay sample, you can just simply zoom in, find where the kick ends, right? Chop it, turn it down, or maybe even delete it or fade into it, right? There's a lot of different ways you could spin that. Spin that. All right, so now on to the body. The body is going to obviously come from the waveform that you're using. It could be sine, square, or triangle. Typically going to filter out more frequencies with a filter or EQ if you're using a square or a triangle. But this is important to note because the body is where you obviously need some presence in terms of the 808, but this is where a lot of frequencies can kind of clash with the lower instruments in your mix. That's where it's important to think, okay, let's look at where the body of my 808, the pitch is residing, or where it's kind of where it's at. And let's make sure that I'm reducing those frequencies in the other sections of my mix. So right here, about 8.2, right, let's see what frequency, we're about 100 hertz. So probably about 100 to, 200. That's going to be kind of the mid-range of an 808, really. Obviously, there's the proper mid-range if you saturate enough. But let's go to the other sections, other instruments in my mix here. And we'll load up FabFilter Pro Q3, and I'm going to actually just reduce a little frequency here between 100. We'll give it a little bit of a drop right there and a drop right there, right? So this bell sound, we don't need a sub frequency, right? It's just a bell sound. And I'm going to put that same EQ on the other patch right here. So now what I'm just doing is I'm just removing those frequencies, so there should be more room. And that's just to make the body of my 808 stand out more. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about, it's kind of like a bonus section of the anatomy of an 808, and that's a pitch envelope. A lot of 808 samples are made with an envelope that's tied to the pitch of the synth or the software that's being used to create the 808. And what that does is it kind of pitches the sound down a little bit. So I have that built into this patch that I made. If I crank this up, we'll hear an extreme example. Right, that's way too much, but adding a little bit goes a long way with an 808. It's just a very nice sound. Right, it's kind of sliding down in pitch from the attack, from the transient, and it usually just works quite nicely. All right, guys, so that's a quick look at the anatomy, the makeup of an 808. Just to recap, it's those three parts. You have the attack, the transient, which is usually a small kick. You have the body, and you have the tail. Now, in that body, you might have saturation. You might have some type of, pitch envelope, but that's really it. Once you understand that, it becomes quite simple and clear about how you need to mix the 808 to fit your track. If you already have a kick, make sure you reduce or take away the kick in the sample. And depending on your mix and the instruments that are there, make sure that you don't have things clashing with the body of the 808 if at all possible, because it'll make the 808 a lot easier to mix. You won't have to saturate as much, and you won't have to turn up its volume as much to overtake your mix, right? If you guys have any questions or comments, post those below. We'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. If you're not subscribed to the ADSR channel, please do that now. And if you do, hit that notification button so you get an update when we release a new video. All right, guys, like I said at the beginning, I'm Echo Soundworks. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.